Rolling. Okay. Hi there, thanks for visiting the Greening Bathurst website. We thought we'd put this video up because Greening Bathurst had recently gained some attention in the media for coming out in support of a pumped hydro project which is in or very close to the boundary of the local government area of Bathurst. And I think a lot of the community was looking to us thinking we would oppose it because there are of course going to be impacts locally which affect plants and animals, and that is our remit. So why would Greening Bathurst support a project like this? Look, I think you need to start at the very highest level and say, is climate change an existential threat for life on this planet or not? We, based on the evidence, seem to think it is, and in fact that climate change represents a major threat for all of life on the planet. Climate variability and long-term change predictions are not looking good at the moment, and also the other problem is it's really not looking like humanity is tackling that issue seriously and curbing emissions much at all. So if you accept that climate change is an existential threat, then you also have to decide who's going to fix that. Is that going to be someone far away, somewhere else, and is it their responsibility, or is it something that sits with all of us? And that leads us to think, well, what can we do? Now, many of us in the community look to do their own bit to reduce our impact on the planet by the way we move around, the transport, whether we offset, that kind of thing. But really, it's small, you know. Any individual can only make so much difference. What we actually need to do on a massive scale is to decarbonise our energy networks and our energy provision for mobile plant as well. Now, if you're going to get off coal, which is really in Australia what decarbonising the energy network is, then you need storage, because solar is the cheapest form of new energy in the world, followed closely by wind power, but as of course all the detractors will say, the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow, so you need storage in the network. The question is, how do you get storage? Well, there's two ways really. Well, there's several ways, but two of the fundamental ways are to use pumped hydro or to use some kind of chemical battery. The pumped hydro really is where you use pumps to push water up a hill, and then those pumps turn into generators when the water comes back down the hill, and that makes electricity. They only really work when there's a price differential, so it's cheaper to pump water up than the electricity you generate from letting it run down. On the other hand, you've got all sorts of chemical batteries. There's a lot of change in that space, but basically this means mining rare earths and minerals, sending bits and pieces off to mostly China or Asia, where well, let's face it, poor people in faraway countries make those batteries for us. So we need batteries to decarbonise. If we're going to get rid of coal and replace it with renewables, that's what we need. Now, if you look at pumped hydro, from our perspective, that's something that actually you build some dams, you build that infrastructure, and that will run for tens and, well, decades and actually 100 years. It's a long-lasting, actually on a global perspective, quite low impact technology. Really, it requires fairly low ongoing maintenance, fairly low inputs, certainly doesn't require us to keep mining rare earths or chemicals, certainly doesn't require other people in faraway places to live a worse life because of what we're trying to achieve. So, climate change is real, we should do something. Second, pumped hydro, in contrast to other forms of storage, is in our view actually a really viable option. And in fact, the University of Canberra agrees and says actually there's something like 1,400 really good sites for what they call microhydro up and down the Great Eastern Range of Australia. I was once asked what I thought of Snowy 2.0, and my response to that was to say it's not a bad idea, it's just that there's 1,400 better ones. And that means that you put the storage where you need it, up and down the range, where people are, where the load is, where the energy's been generated, and you distribute the impact and you distribute the benefit of this increased storage in the network. Okay, so that gets us to a point where we go, well, we need this stuff, and pumped hydro is a valid solution to the problem. Now, the next step is, yes, but is building that so bad that it's actually not worth it? And really we should do that somewhere else, or we should come up with an alternative solution. So to answer that question, we looked at the research that was conducted by the ATCO group, and we also spoke to local ecologists, some of whom had been involved in that research, such as David Goldie. We also drew on our own local networks and expertise in the sphere to say, well, what would that impact be? And it's fair to say that as a group, we were actually impressed with the way ATCO had approached the project. Certainly they've done a lot of research in terms of what those ecological impacts could be. They haven't tried to hide behind any particular species or animal being there. In fact, they've gone out of their way to look at more species that could be there, that could be impacted. Secondly, we were impressed that there were a number of simple things that they had done to preserve what native species are there, as opposed to what we have seen traditionally with other developments like industrial estates, urban sprawl, factories, mines that go up, that really to date have just gone, well, we just wipe out the environment. This development hadn't taken that approach. A tangible example was the moving of an access road which needed to be upgraded. The organisation spoke to the company and said, well, how about we put a new road next to the old road, and then we won't have to widen it and take out those trees. So that is an example. The other thing we were impressed with was that where the top dam sits is in between two existing wildlife refuges. Connectivity between fragments of intact bushland is really important for species movement. And they're proposing, if they're successful, to join up those two wildlife reserves, which is a net positive benefit. The other thing is downstream, their plan is to restore degraded catchments, or the degraded state of Frying Pan Creek, which would result in better water quality there. So we go, actually, it's, that looks good. What else could go wrong with this thing? Well, the major risk is around water and water security. And we've all lived through 2019 and the dry here. And so it might be the fact that we go, well, we need this thing. Yes, there's a few trees that have got to go, but on the whole, there'll be a net increase in tree cover and potentially wildlife corridors. But actually, you still can't do it because it has such a bad impact on the waterway. So if you look at that question, then there is a large amount of water that's required to fill the dams in the first place. This is actually an off-river system. So you have a top dam and a bottom dam, and the water goes up and down between. It would be endless, except you lose some through seepage and also evaporation. So you have to top up. You have to fill the thing up in the first place, and then you have to keep topping it up. So filling it up could be an issue. It's quite a lot of water. It's, I think, around 3,000 megs. That was about it. Anyway, it's a lot of water to do that. But in a wet time like we've just had, that is really days or weeks of flow. So we know that there are periods of time that a water system could deliver that. Not all the time, of course. On the general run of the river, we're looking at a top-up that's really, a few weeks or a couple of months of Bathurst's entire water consumption. So it's not trivial. It's definitely, an amount to be considered. Could that be done sustainably? Well, there's a water sharing plan and there are licence agreements, and that is a commercial risk for the company and a society-wide discussion around what's the best use of water. Is it better off going for the environment, for farmers, for towns, for this sort of energy project? And I think in that extent, we have to accept that it's a commercial risk for ATCO as an operator, and it plays out as a in the water market and in the broader sharing discussion that we have around a scarce resource. But what we can say is that ideally this thing knocks out Mount Piper Power Station, which, if you've been there, you can see those big water towers that go with coal-fired power plants. That water is taken out of the Fish River system right now and gets evaporated. Now, that water is a one-way thing. That doesn't go up and down. That just disappears out into the air. And if that water can be diverted into the river, then the problem is more than solved. So there is a tangible mechanism to the long-term sustainable supply of water for this project. So all of those things lead us to a position where we go, you know what, this is this is probably worth considering. Now, of course, it has to go through a whole planning stage. It's not a fait accompli at the moment. But from our perspective, if we look at all of the development occurring in the Bathurst Basin at the moment, this is actually something that needs to be done. I don't think, can wait for all our problems to be fixed somewhere else. You know, somebody has to take a hit. Somebody has to get up and do this stuff. We can't keep waiting for other regions or other people to fix the problem for us. The final point that I'd really like to make is that when these developments occur, previously, I think all of us in Greening Bathurst agree that development has not been done in a sustainable way. We have not adequately factored in the cost to the environment, and we have not adequately, as a result of that development, delivered long-term benefits to the communities. And you can look at mining industries as examples of that. In the past, they've got away with exploiting the resource to the benefit of the shareholders and the mining company, and a very small bit of, a little bit of something. We get, nice swings in parks and a few things, but we don't get anything transformative as a result of that mine or that industrial estate or that factory, other than the jobs and growth kind of mentality. Certainly from an environmentalist point of view, most developments to date have left us worse off. That's different when it comes to renewables. I mean, aside from the climate and the carbon mitigation impacts, there's a really strong agenda at a state government and operator level to make sure that these projects actually result in long-term benefit. And so that's referred to as a voluntary planning agreement. And that is where these companies are forced to provide a significant cash flow in the long term to be spent in that local community by that local community. We've had an undertaking from ATCO that we would have a seat at the table there, and we would be steering a significant amount of money into the restoration of the Fish River catchment. Now that excites us because that catchment is heavily degraded. It does not deliver the clean water that it did 200 years ago. It is not full of fish for the fact that it was named for. The catchments themselves are still degrading. The soil is still being lost. Biodiversity is still at threat. So if we could have an industrial kind of project that helped decarbonise the grid, that resulted in a long-term sustainable revenue stream to restore that catchment, that would be a good thing. I certainly can't see that kind of millions of dollars of money coming from council, from state or local governments who still put environment at the bottom of the list, and nice to have, So wouldn't it be great if we could have the right sort of industrial development that also, as a consequence, delivered the right sort of landscape and environment outcomes? And that's the basis of Greening Bathurst supporting the ATCO project. Thank you. Was that too waffly?